Alright guys, quick video here today on 5 of the most common mistakes I see people make in the gym when they're doing bent over rows. The first and by far the most common is when people stay too upright on their bent over rows. The more upright you stay on your rows, the more you target things like your rear delts, your traps and your upper back, as opposed to maximally targeting your lats if you're parallel to the floor, which is something you might want to do considering your lats are the biggest muscle in your back. So next time you're doing your bent over rows, remember to keep your torso parallel to the floor, as if you would in the end range of motion in a Romanian deadlift. Another trap people fall into when they're doing the rows is not using a full range of motion. Remember, in virtually all exercises you do in the gym, using a full range of motion will always be better than a partial range of motion for muscle growth. Now of course this doesn't mean you have to let the weights touch the floor every single time you row, but you probably should use the largest range of motion as you can without compromising your technique. So if you can go all the way down to the bottom and let the weight touch the floor on a row without rounding your lower back at all, then you should obviously do that. But if you have to stop a couple inches from the floor to keep your lower back intact and not let it round, then that's perfectly fine too. Going too fast on your reps is another common pitfall people seem to fall into when they're doing any sort of free weight row, barbell included. Most of the scientific literature on muscle growth seems to show that taking about 2 seconds to lower the weight on most exercises is effective. So if you're taking about half a second or so to lower the weight on your rows, the chances are that you're probably A, not really controlling the weight with your muscles, and B, not allowing for enough time under tension on your lats to really stimulate any growth. If you find it difficult to lower the weight from the top of the movement down to the bottom slowly, because you've been doing it fast for so long and you've ingrained it as a bad habit, try to count down from roughly 2 or 3 seconds in your head when you're at the top of the rep on the way down. Another common mistake people make on the bent over rows is swinging around a lot and just moving whatever they need to move to get the weight from A to B. When you swing around a lot and use your legs to get the weight up, what you do is you take tension away from your lats and you move it to muscles like your quads, your hips, your glutes and your lower back. In turn, what you end up doing is turning your rows into a mediocre lat exercise because you don't allow yourself to maximally load them, and making the exercise subpar for your hips, glutes and quads because you don't train them through a large range of motion, in turn rendering the whole exercise the worst of both worlds. Lastly, another mistake I see people make in the gym all the time when they do their bent over rows is rounding their lower back. The more you round your back on your bent over rows, the more work your spinal erectors do rather than your lats. And training your spinal erectors isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, after all, having big spinal erectors is what makes for a thicker looking back. But bending your lower back and training your spinal erectors in this fashion on a bent over row is probably not the best way to go about training them. Mainly because your spinal erectors are already doing a lot of work just to maintain a neutral spine position when you do your rows with a flat back. So if you can keep your back straight and focus on pulling through your elbows, you get the benefits of training both your lats, which are the largest muscle in your back, and your spinal erectors to both a large degree. So what you can see here on the side of the screen is an example of what good form looks like on bent over rows. My back is as close to parallel to the floor as I can get it without rounding my lower back. I'm using a full range of motion. I'm not rocking back and forth and using a ton of momentum to get the weight from the bottom to the top. And I'm not going super fast on either the concentric or the eccentric.